Okay, early childhood training, especially with dad engaging, part four. Um, I'm reminded, and we didn't touch on this, I don't think, but if children aren't trained to not be sloppy in how they handle right and wrong, good and bad, good and evil, when they're little, then it's awfully hard. Like there's a synapse in their brain that didn't get hooked up for them to really understand good and evil and right and wrong when they get a little older. One of the complaints I've had against parenting that doesn't include a certain amount of absolutes. I mean, absolute training, this will not be tolerated, no way, no how, comes when in a very loose culture, and they're a little older. It's younger every day, by the way. It's kind of horrifying because we have a lot of sexually active junior high kids. In fact, in some circles, they say if a kid's still a virgin when they get out of junior high, that they're shunned because they're somehow backward in their sin. They need to catch up on your sin here. But anyway, yeah. So when little Susie decides that she wants to act out sexually and immoral. So, well, if she's 14 or less, trust me, she's being immoral at that point. But anyway, when it's not about the small things anymore, when it's not about the small acts of rebellion or the small acts of selfishness, but it's getting into big stuff, but we've never trained them on the little stuff, then we have parents pulling their hair out. They go, oh, the teens, everything went to hell in their teens. Well, it shouldn't have. That just indicates they weren't trained when they were little. Yeah. Otherwise, it wouldn't have went south or to hell when they were teens.
When you didn't enforce your no when they were one, you had that piece of glass crystal on the coffee table that, if you're going to childproof your house to the extent that nothing can happen, you're not going to engage in any good training at the little age. You should have been able to teach them and start instructing them no and enforce that they wouldn't break your piece of crystal. Now, I'm not talking about some super delicate thing, of course, but or something that they could hurt themselves with. But the parent that thinks, well, that's cute and I'll just move it out of their way, you missed a training opportunity. You could have enforced your no, and they would look at that. And I've seen little kids do it that were being trained. They're like tempted, I want to grab that, and they'll point at it and go no and walk away. And that, my heart rejoices to see that there's a parent doing their job.
Somebody's training the kids. And again, when it's a little thing, you think, well, if they didn't learn to not destroy everything in the house, oh well. I'm not uptight about my belongings. The kid's more important in every argument you've ever heard. And yes, the kids are more important, but that's not the point. The point is they're so important that they should be correctly trained. And again, we don't really see the manifestation of this until kids grow up, and then they get off into fornication and or adultery, immorality of some kind. Could be sexual immorality, could be drugs, could be anything that the culture is doing, including, nose rings in the middle of their face or whatever it happens to be. And I apologize for even having said that, although I'm not sorry, but I'm just saying, anything that the culture is dictating, the kids are going to be tempted with or drawn to. If you didn't train them to stay out of the cookie jar when they were, a year and a half, then how are you going to keep their pants on them when they're 14? And that's a brilliant question for you parents, especially you dads. How did you really train that child?
Yeah. And really, a lot of this we're talking about what could be just generalized as impulse control. If you didn't teach them impulse control when they're one, now they don't have that tool that when you're not there and they're 14 and somebody tempts them with something and they know and they want to say no, but it's never been enforced, so they don't know how to say no to their own impulses. You haven't helped them. You haven't trained them. Now you're seeing the bad fruit of where you fell down on the job.
And they will learn the hard way. Okay, if they're doing stuff that's illegal, they can wind up in jail or shot or whatever it might be. If they're just doing stuff that's immoral, they can suffer all kinds of emotional anguish and physical repercussions from that. I'm seeing a lot. This is a trend, I would say, amongst children that were not trained very well, if in fact at all, that they're going on 30 years old and have had multiple relationships, relationships like marriage or unmarriage or shacking up or bad word, bad cop, whatever. They've had all these different things, and they're suffering emotionally and physically, and they may have children that don't know who their daddy is or whatever, all because nobody trained them when they were little that certain things were off limits, out of bounds, completely out of bounds. And part of that training, if we remember, was not only do you tell the child, we're not going to do this, but you reinforce, hey, we're not doing this. I had that happen with one of my daughters to where, I said, hey, this dude's no good for you. And, you need to stay clean away from him. And next thing you know, he's hauled her off somewhere, and I got to show up out there and say, enough's enough, bud. And so I won't get into it. I didn't hurt nobody, but boy, I'm not saying I wouldn't have, but I just laid the law down and said, this ain't even going to happen no more. And pardon my poor English, but it didn't happen anymore after that either.